Welcome to No Sleep, where the night never ends, and every whisper in the dark could be something real. Tonight's story isn't just horror. It's a memory, a warning, a door that should have stayed closed. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and whatever you do, don't fall asleep. Even after all these years, there are things that don't fade. Memories so sharp, so heavy with dread that they cut deeper the older you get. I've lived a long life, served as sheriff for nearly 3 decades in a town most people wouldn't bother to name on a map. Kendall, tucked near the northern edge of the state, where the forests grow thick and the winters come early. It was always quiet, safe. But in 1981, maybe 82, that illusion shattered for me. It was late November, the kind of cold that doesn't just make your skin prickle, but presses against your bones like wet concrete. Even with the heater rattling inside my little cabin, you could still feel it creep in. My joints knew it was winter before the calendar did. Retirement hadn't dulled those memories. If anything, the silence of old age made them louder. My granddaughter likes to ask about the wildest thing I ever went through as a sheriff. Did I ever draw my gun? Ever get shot at? And sure, I give her the clean stories, the car chases, the drunk and disorderly clowns, the time a guy held up the hardware store with a nail gun. Makes me look like a hero. Makes her eyes light up. But the real story? The one that clings like smoke after a fire? That one I keep to myself, most days, until now. It started with a call. I remember the morning. The sky was a sheet of gray, like the sun had just given up trying to shine. I came into the station early. Coffee was still burning on the pot, smelled like tar, when Bonnie, my secretary, handed me a note with a furrowed brow. Call from a Jonathan Redtree, said it's urgent. A horse is dead. He's scared. The name struck me, Jonathan, son of Elijah Redtree, a quiet, spiritual Algonquin man who used to lend horses to our department when we needed them for search and rescue in the woods. Elijah was respected, dignified, died some years back. I hadn't seen Jonathan since the funeral, when the kid stood like stone at his father's burial, eyes sunken from grief. Now he was calling me in a panic. I tried phoning back, but it rang unanswered. So I loaded up the police truck, not the cruiser, figuring the terrain might be rough. He lived on reservation land, a good hour from the highway, buried in the forest's edge where the roads turned to dust and pine needles. As I drove, my mind kept circling the same disturbing thought. A group of hikers had gone missing weeks earlier in that same region. No leads, no sightings, just vanished. And now this. Jonathan's place was deeper than I remembered. The brush had grown wild, and the path felt like it hadn't seen a vehicle in years. When I finally reached the clearing, I saw a dark green pickup already parked near the bottom of the hill. The house sat above, a weather-beaten log cabin. Its roof bowed like an old man's back, nestled against the forest like it was trying to hide. The stables behind the house were silent, no horses visible. I climbed the steep incline, every step making my knees scream. By the time I reached the porch, I was short of breath. I knocked. No answer. Then the smell hit me, like rot. Not just decay, something fouler, more primal. It clung to the back of my throat and made my eyes water. "Jonathan?" I called out. A weak voice replied, not from the house, but beyond it. I followed the sound to the field behind the cabin, where I found him. He was half kneeling in a pit, shirt soaked through with sweat despite the cold. His hands were slick with blood and dirt, and beside him was what remained of a horse. Its body had been torn, not just chewed, ripped open with a violence that made my stomach turn. guts spilling like wet rope. Something had fed on it, but only halfway, like it had been interrupted or wasn't hungry at all. Jesus, I muttered, instinctively stepping back. What the hell did this? Jonathan didn't look at me. He kept shoveling chunks of flesh and bone into the hole. His face was gaunt, lips cracked. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I found him by the forest line, he said. Dragged him back myself. Took me hours. What did this? A bear? I asked. His shovel froze midair. Then slowly he shook his head. No, not a bear. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw his eyes, wide and haunted, red around the rims. There was something primal in his fear, like a child who'd seen the devil. There's something in the woods, he whispered, been watching us, watching the house. Every night it gets closer. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something rational, calming, but I couldn't. There was something in his voice that chilled me more than the cold ever could. I saw it, Sheriff. Standing among the trees, tall, wrong. He gestured toward the forest. It never steps into the light, just waits. I glanced toward the tree line, but there was only wind and trees swaying. Still, something in my gut twisted. I didn't believe in monsters or ghosts, but I'd seen enough in this life to know that fear that deep doesn't come from nothing. Something had happened here, something real. Jonathan's voice was hoarse, not from yelling, but from silence. The kind of silence that comes from too many sleepless nights, from holding back what your mind insists can't be true. He dropped the shovel with a dull thud and sat on the edge of the pit, his hands slick with something I tried not to look at too long. There's something wrong with the woods now, he said. It used to be quiet. Still. I could hear the wind and the animals at night. But now, his voice trailed off, and I waited. The wind was beginning to pick up, cold, dry, whispering. Now I don't hear birds anymore. The wind doesn't rustle the branches. It's like the trees are holding their breath. I crouched nearby, knees aching as I looked at what was left of the horse. It was a beautiful animal, once, strong. Now its hide was torn in strips like wet paper, ribs cracked wide open. Something had mauled it with incredible force, but didn't eat it in the usual way. There were no paw prints in the mud nearby. No blood trail leading in or out. You think someone did this? I asked. Jonathan shook his head, slow and deliberate. I saw it. That stopped me. He continued, eyes focused on nothing, staring into a memory. I let the horses out into the field one evening, like I always did, but they were restless, all of them, snorting, twitching. They refused to go near the forest. I thought maybe it was a storm coming. He wiped a hand across his forehead. It came away wet, despite the chill. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. The horses were screaming. Not neighing, screaming. I grabbed my rifle, ran to the window, and saw something in the trees. What did it look like? I asked, trying to keep my tone even. He was silent for a while, then, like a man, but not how. It was too tall. Not tall like a basketball player, tall like wrong. Its arms were too long. Its head was all wrong. It didn't move right. It just stood there, halfway behind a tree, like it was pretending. Like it thought if it stayed still enough, I wouldn't notice. And you're sure it wasn't someone messing with you? He gave me a look. Not angry, not even frustrated. Just empty. Like he knew I wouldn't believe him. I know what a man looks like in the dark, Sheriff. This wasn't that. It was something else. He paused, then leaned forward and lowered his voice. And it didn't make a sound. Not one, but I felt it screaming at me inside my head. Not words, just this pressure, this presence, like something ancient and starving was thinking about me. I felt goosebumps rise up my arms. I stayed inside that night. I watched from the window until the sun came up. When I finally went out, I found the horse like this, torn up like it got hit by a train made of claws. And tracks? Nothing. Not a damn thing. Maybe it was a bear, I offered, knowing full well I didn't believe it. Jonathan just stared at me. I know what a bear does. I've lived with them my whole life. A bear doesn't peel skin off like a banana and leave the rest. A bear doesn't leave footprints like a deer one day and none the next. That made me blink. What do you mean? He swallowed hard. Sometimes I find prints near the edge of the field. Sometimes they're shaped like hooves, sometimes like hands, but never the same. Never normal. And they always lead back to the trees. I didn't say anything for a moment. The air had grown still, as if the forest was listening. A bird called once, far off. Then silence again. Jonathan looked terrible, pale, twitchy, sweat sticking to the hollows under his eyes. He was barely keeping it together. Whether it was truth or madness, something was devouring him from the inside out. "You've been sleeping?" I asked him. He laughed, short and dry. "Not for more than an hour at a time. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it, breathing just outside the window. And sometimes I wake up, and I swear the curtains are pulled back, even when I left them closed." I stared at him, heart beating just a little faster. "Why didn't you call sooner?" "I thought I could handle it," he said. "That maybe it would move on, but it's only getting closer." He stood and looked at me, jaw tight. "I can't leave the property. Not with my horses here. It's waiting. I know it is." That's when I made the decision. "I'll come back tonight," I said. "Stay with you. Watch over things while you get some damn sleep." He looked at me like he didn't know whether to be relieved or horrified. "Don't do that," he said quietly. "It doesn't like visitors." "Well, I don't like dead horses." He stared at the forest, his breath fogging in the air, then finally nodded. "Okay, but come before sundown. It doesn't show itself in daylight." "I'll be here," I promised. As I left, he stood at the edge of the pit, watching me go. It wasn't until I got back to the truck that I realized the stench I smelled earlier. It wasn't coming from the horse. It was coming from the trees. By the time I reached the edge of the forest again, the sun had died behind the mountains and left nothing but bruised clouds in its place. The dirt road that led to Jonathan's property had grown darker, thinner, as if the trees were closing in on it. I rolled down the window to get a feel for the air. It was still. Too still. No wind. No birds. Even the engine of my old police truck seemed reluctant, sputtering slightly as I pulled into the clearing. Jonathan's truck was gone. I parked beside the house and killed the engine. Immediately, I felt the difference. The silence wasn't just absence, it was weight. It pressed on your chest like standing in a coffin. The porch light flickered faintly. A single old oil lantern burned outside, casting long shadows up the wooden walls like skeletal fingers. "Jonathan?" I called out, stepping out of the vehicle, shotgun slung over my shoulder. No answer. I moved cautiously up the hill, boots sinking slightly in the wet, cold dirt. The trees had vanished into the dark behind me. I could no longer tell where the clearing ended and the woods began. The house loomed above like a forgotten relic. That was when I noticed the door, slightly ajar, swaying with the wind that shouldn't have been there. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Instinct kicked in. I chambered a shell in the shotgun and stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned beneath me like it remembered footsteps that hadn't walked in years. My fingers itched at the cold steel of my flashlight, and I clicked it on with my free hand, pushing the door slowly inward. The smell hit me immediately, worse than before. It was death, but not just of the body. It was rot, mold, wet fur, and coppery blood in something older, something primal. It clung to the walls, to the blankets, to the very timber of the cabin, like it had soaked into the wood grain. Inside, the house looked untouched. Tribal artwork still adorned the walls. A dream catcher swayed gently over the sofa, its feathers drifting as though moved by breath. The sink in the corner kitchen trickled water into a rust-stained basin. A cast-iron pan sat on the stovetop, still warm, as if someone had only just left. I crept in slowly, calling his name under my breath, checking corners, keeping my back to the wall. The hallway to the bedrooms was narrow and dark. I tried both rooms, empty, beds unmade, clothes still folded on a dresser, no sign of struggle. But that stench clung thicker in the back hallway, as though it started there. And then I heard something outside. Not footsteps. Something dragging. I ran to the back door and threw it open, flashlight beams slicing through the night. Nothing but the stable. The stable looked wrong. I bolted toward it, boots squelching in the wet grass. The flashlight barely cut through the fog, now rolling across the ground like fingers. I reached the stable doors, wide open, one half hanging on a single hinge. I shined the light inside. Empty. All the stalls. Gone. Not even hay on the ground. The air inside was frigid, colder than outside. My breath came in shallow bursts, puffing out like smoke. And then, above me, a sound. A low hoot. I turned my light upward. A massive owl sat on the support beam, white feathers glowing like bone in the light. It watched me, not like prey, not like a threat, but like it knew something. I stepped back, uneased, and the owl spread its wings and glided silently into the trees, vanishing like fog. I turned slowly, scanning the field behind the house. Nothing. Just a black void where the forest should be. But then, Mikey, see, I saw it. Barely. A shape. At the edge of the trees. No more than 50 yards out. Still. Tall. Too tall. I froze. The flashlight trembled in my hand. I aimed it at the shape. For a second, I thought it was a dead tree. One of those twisted ones that you only notice at night. But then it moved. It didn't turn. Didn't walk. It unfolded. Limbs stretching slowly, joints cracking like dry twigs. The shape straightened, and I saw, in the briefest glimpse, something like a head, wrong in every proportion. No eyes, no mouth, just presence. Then it moved, not walked, glided, a blur, across the edge of the field and into the darkness, silent and fast, too fast. I stumbled back and fired. The shotgun blast split the night. Buckshot tore into the underbrush, but it was already gone. There was nothing to hit, not even the rustle of bushes. Just echo. Just nothing. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, listening for footsteps, growls, anything. But the night returned to silence. I backed toward the house, shotgun trembling, flashlight beam darting back and forth. At the porch, I turned quickly and scrambled up the steps, pressed my back to the doorframe. Still no sign of Jonathan. No blood. No struggle. Just absence. And that smell, like something waiting. I took a breath. And then I heard it. distant but clear. A howl. Not a wolf, not a coyote. Something else, long, hollow, and almost human. Then, silence. The kind that doesn't end. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch until the first rays of light burned the trees gold. And even then, I didn't feel safe. Because somewhere out there, beyond the brush, I knew. It was still watching. I didn't go home after that night. I drove straight to the station as the sky turned from pitch to pearl. Didn't even stop for coffee. Didn't speak to Bonnie. Just walked past her desk with my shotgun still in hand and went straight into my office. I locked the door behind me. I must have sat there for hours, unmoving, the events of the night playing on loop in my mind. The way the shadows danced behind trees that weren't there. The blur of movement that defied all natural speed. That thing, if it was a thing, that seemed to absorb light and silence in equal measure. But more than anything else, the absence. Jonathan was gone. So were the horses, all of them. The house hadn't been ransacked. No blood, no broken glass. Just the kind of quiet that settles in the wake of something monstrous. And the worst part? I had no proof. Just an empty house and a spent shell casing in my coat pocket. I waited until my deputies arrived for the day, then called them into my office. I didn't tell them everything. Hell, I could barely make sense of it myself. But I said enough. That Jonathan hadn't been seen since the day before. That his truck was gone. That I had reason to believe something unusual had happened on his property. I used the word unusual carefully. It made people pay attention, without calling me crazy. By noon, a local trooper called in. Jonathan's green pickup had been found on the side of the highway, about 10 miles south of town, lodged in a ditch. I went to the scene myself. The truck had hit hard. The windshield was fractured. The front bumper twisted like aluminum foil. But what really hit me was what was left inside. The driver's side was smeared with dried blood. A Bowie knife lay in the grass nearby, the handle wrapped in red-stained gauze. On the seat, a tattered denim jacket. Outside, 2 sets of tracks led away from the crash, disappearing into the trees, one of them barefoot. I didn't need a warrant after that. That afternoon, I returned to Jonathan's property with 2 deputies and a search dog. I stayed quiet most of the ride up, let the forest do the talking. The dog whined as we approached the hill, wouldn't even step onto the grass near the house. Just sat in the truck, trembling. The cabin was unchanged, exactly as I'd left it. Porch, light off. Door still half open. The faint stink of rot, lingering like a bad dream. The deputies moved ahead of me, checking the interior. One radioed in. No sign of a struggle. Everything's clean. They were wrong. Nothing about that house was clean. I stepped inside and immediately felt it again. The pressure in the air, like being deep underwater. The dream catcher still swayed, though no wind blew. The stove was cold now, but the scent of cooked meat clung faintly to the cast iron. I didn't follow the others. I had one destination in mind, the cellar. I made my way around the house, slowly. The chain on the storm doors had been broken. Not cut, not unlatched, broken. Bent outward like something had forced its way through from the inside. There were 2 jagged holes in the wood, one big enough to push a fist through. The other looked like a gunshot. I flicked on my flashlight and descended. The air changed instantly, from cold to frigid. My breath turned white in front of me, even though it was only late fall. The concrete steps were stained, muddy, but the further down I went, the stains turned darker, sticky. And the smell, my God, the smell, like something had been rotting in silence for decades. The cellar wasn't big. Barely a single room with low ceilings and exposed earth in the back. But what I found there would chase sleep from my life for years to come. Bones, scattered, gnawed, broken. Some animal, most not. Human femurs, cracked and splintered, teeth marks, chains bolted into the far wall, rusted cuffs, one still holding a shredded piece of cloth. And in the dirt near the back, a woman's boot, half buried. I fell to my knees, scraping at the soil. More bones, smaller, thinner. I called for the others, told them not to come down, to call the coroner, the lab, anything. They brought down masks and gloves. One of them vomited on the stairs. The other went pale and sat down without a word. We sent the remains off to the state lab. DNA confirmed what I feared. One of them matched Sally Miller, one of the hikers who'd gone missing in the area months earlier. I tried to tell myself it had to be Jonathan, that maybe the pressure broke him, that maybe he'd snapped. But I couldn't make myself believe it. Not fully, because the teeth marks on those bones weren't human. Not exactly. Too sharp, too long. Jagged in places like they'd been broken and regrown. The medical examiner said it looked like a wild animal had fed. Maybe a bear, maybe wolves. But the spacing of the jaws, the angles of the punctures, they didn't match any known predator in the region. One of the bites had punctured a rib clean through. And it wasn't just bones. In the far corner, behind a stack of old feed bags, we found something carved into the stone wall, scratched with something sharp, deep and crude. It was a symbol, a tall figure, long arms, a crown of branches on its head, eyes like empty rings. Below it, scrawled in childlike letters, "It waits." I didn't sleep for 2 nights after we found the cellar. Not even a doze. I'd try. Lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the shadows to settle. But every time my eyes drifted closed, they snapped open again at the faintest creak or gust of wind brushing against the house. Martha knew something was wrong the moment I walked through the door. Not because of how late it was, or how pale I looked, but because I stood just inside the entrance for 5 minutes, staring out the window, shotgun still slung over my shoulder. I didn't move, didn't even blink, she said. When I finally turned to her, I said only 3 words, "Don't go near the woods." She didn't ask why, didn't push, not like she normally would. She looked at me, really looked, and saw something that made her nod without a word. She locked every door and closed every curtain in the house that night, even turned off the porch light. Later, after the kids were asleep, she came into our room holding 2 steaming mugs of tea and a blanket. She sat beside me in bed, cross-legged like she used to when we were younger. "What did you see?" she asked quietly. The way she said it made me pause. Not what happened, but what did you see? I looked at her and my throat clenched because I didn't know how to answer. I tried to speak. The words didn't come. Instead, I reached into my pocket and handed her something. The shotgun shell. The one I fired into the trees, spent and blackened. She stared at it for a long moment, then placed it gently on the nightstand. Then, she reached across and took my hand. "You're not crazy," she said, "but you brought something back." I wanted to argue, wanted to say that was ridiculous, that whatever was out there in those woods was still there, buried in that wilderness, that it didn't follow men home. But that was before the owl. That night, just after midnight, I heard the low hoot echoing outside the bedroom window. At first, I ignored it. Then I heard it again, closer. I pulled aside the curtain, just an inch. A pale white shape sat on the branch of the elm just outside the window, perfectly still, eyes wide and unblinking. It stared at me. Not the window, me. The moment my eyes met its, the hair on my arms stood up like static had crawled under my skin. I dropped the curtain and backed away, heart pounding. "What is it?" Martha whispered. "There's an owl," I said. "Same one from the stable." She stood up, went to the window, and looked out. Her breath caught. "It's watching the house," she said. "Why is it just sitting there?" I didn't have an answer. I went to the hall closet, pulled out the same shotgun, loaded it quietly. Martha didn't argue. The owl stayed the rest of the night, unmoving. Just before dawn, it vanished. No flutter of wings, no rustle of branches. Gone. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, that I was projecting, making patterns out of grief and stress. But then the lights started flickering. Not at once, gradually. The bathroom light would go out when I was brushing my teeth. The hallway lamp would dim when I walked by, then return to normal after I passed. And then, the dreams. The same one every time. I'm back at Jonathan's cabin. It's night. The air is cold. I can see my breath. I walk up the porch, but this time the door is closed, sealed shut with bark and branches twisted like muscle. From the woods, I hear whispering, soft, almost melodic. I can't understand the words, but I know they're about me. And then something moves through the trees, always too fast to see, always too tall. And I wake up, drenched in sweat, heart racing, with the image of a tree that isn't a tree burned into my mind. On the third night, I woke to the sound of my youngest daughter crying. I ran to her room, Martha already there, holding her, trying to soothe her. She said there was a man outside the window, Martha whispered to me when our daughter finally fell asleep again, but that he didn't move, just stood there. I froze. What did he look like? Martha shook her head. She said she couldn't see his face. I checked the yard the next morning, found nothing, but something had been pressed into the soil outside the window. Not a footprint exactly. Something long, split, like a hoof, but not quite. That was the day I knew it hadn't stayed in the woods. Something had followed me back, or maybe it had always been coming, waiting, watching. I called Bernard, an old friend and deputy who had retired a few years before me. He was the only person I could trust not to laugh, not to call me crazy. He listened as I told him everything, from the horse to the cellar to the owl. When I finished, he was quiet. "You remember Elijah Redtree?" he finally said. "Jonathan's dad?" "Of course." He used to tell stories. Said there were spirits older than the land, things the forest remembers even when people forget. He paused. "You ever ask why his cabin was built there?" "No." He said there was a line the old ones never crossed, a boundary, and that cabin was right on the edge of it. I sat back, eyes burning. "You think it's real?" "I think something's feeding on fear out there," Bernard said, "and now it knows your name." That night, I didn't sleep. The owl returned. This time, it sat on the windowsill, closer, eyes reflecting something that wasn't the moon, and far off in the wind. I swear I heard a voice, not calling to me, calling for me. I don't know what finally made me go back. Maybe it was the owl. Maybe it was the dreams. Or maybe it was that single moment of stillness in my daughter's room. When I watched her sleep, curled up against her stuffed animal, and realized I could no longer protect her, not from this. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep. I kissed Martha on the forehead, closed the bedroom door behind me, and loaded the shotgun. Slow, mechanical, like I'd done it 1,000 times before. My hands didn't shake, not yet. I left a note on the table. Just 3 words, "Don't follow me," and I drove back. The forest didn't greet me with wind this time. It greeted me with silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Even the gravel beneath my tires made no sound, like the dirt refused to remember me. The hill rose ahead, and beyond it, the cabin. Still dark, still waiting. But something had changed. The trees around it had moved. They leaned closer now, bent at strange angles, as though bowing in worship to something unseen. Their trunks bore deep gashes, not from axes or weather, but from claws, teeth, or something worse. Bark peeled like burned skin. I parked at the bottom, killed the lights, and sat there for a long time, watching, waiting. Then I got out, shotgun in hand, flashlight strapped to my chest. The house was dark, but not empty. I could feel it, the way you feel a predator watching you from the brush. I made my way up the hill, each step heavier than the last. The air grew colder, far colder than it should have been. Frost crackled underfoot. My breath fogged before me. The door to the cabin had been broken in, split down the middle. Inside, the furniture had been thrown aside. The dream catcher ripped in two. The air stank of wet soil, copper, and something electric, like ozone after a lightning strike. I didn't call out for Jonathan this time. I knew he wouldn't answer. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. Then I heard it, a single, deliberate knock, coming from beneath the floorboards. Not loud, not frantic, just one knock. Then silence. I turned toward the hallway and saw it, faint, but there. A trail of footprints. They weren't muddy, they were burned. Black soot prints across the wood, leading toward the back door, and beyond that, to the forest. I followed them, flashlight flickering, shotgun leveled, past the shattered stables, past the field now littered with bones I didn't want to identify, and into the trees. The moment I crossed the tree line, I felt it, like walking into another world. No wind, no sky, no sound, only presence. I walked deeper, unsure how far. Time seemed to bend in that place. The light never changed. The darkness never lifted. But the deeper I went, the more I saw. Carvings in the trees, symbols like those in the cellar, some new, some ancient. A figure with twisted limbs, branches for horns, eyes like hollow rings. And then, a clearing, dead center of the forest, a perfect circle where nothing grew. And in the center, a tree. Except it wasn't a tree. It stood 10, maybe 12 feet tall. Gray bark so tight it looked like skin. 4 arms, or what should have been arms, hung loosely from a swollen split trunk. The branches curled downward like broken limbs. The base was rooted deep in the soil, but bent unnaturally, like it had been growing wrong for centuries. And then it moved, not all at once. First the head, a smooth, eyeless oval, turned toward me. Then the limbs lifted, slow, deliberate. I froze, couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. The thing stood motionless for a moment, and then it began to walk. It didn't step. It slid, dragged across the ground without sound. The trees around it leaned back, recoiling, as if even they wanted to escape it. I raised my shotgun and fired. The buckshot hit dead center. The sound echoed like thunder, but the thing didn't stop, didn't bleed, didn't even flinch. It just kept coming. I turned and ran, blind, branches tearing at my coat, roots pulling at my boots. I could hear it behind me, not running, but moving faster, a blur, a presence that breathed cold and whispered in a voice too deep for the human ear. It spoke to something inside me, ancient, primal. I tripped once, rolled, slammed into the base of a tree, got up again, kept running. I didn't stop until the light changed, until I saw the gray of early morning bleeding through the canopy. The trees thinned, the hill came into view, and behind me, nothing. The forest exhaled, as if it had swallowed something it didn't like. I reached my truck, collapsed inside, and locked the doors. Hands trembling, eyes burning. I didn't start the engine for several minutes. When I finally did, the radio turned on by itself. A voice, soft and slow, whispered a single phrase. It waits. Then static, and silence. The report I filed the following day was short, dry, devoid of meaning. Subject Jonathan Redtree missing. Pickup truck found off Highway 9. Property searched. Cellar discovered with human remains. Possible connection to missing hikers. Cabin uninhabitable. No sign of suspect. Status unresolved. That was the official truth. But the real truth? I locked it up. Buried it under the kind of silence you only learn after years of knowing how quickly the world eats men who see too much. I told no one what happened in the woods that night. Not my deputies, not the coroner, not even Bernard. Martha, maybe. She never asked, not directly. But there were nights she would look at me, after I'd wake up gasping from dreams I couldn't explain. And I'd see in her eyes the same fear I felt. She kept the kids away from the tree line. Even when they grew up, refused to let them camp, hunt, even hike the trails beyond the northern boundary. She didn't say it aloud. She didn't need to, because sometimes fear speaks better in silence. A few months after, the DNA results came back. The bones in the cellar matched one of the hikers, Sally Miller, 19 years old. She'd been missing for nearly 8 weeks. The rest? Too decomposed to identify. Some of the fragments weren't even definitively human. The state called it a cold case. The media ran headlines about cannibalistic hermit in the northern woods. People whispered about Jonathan, said he snapped, said the grief drove him to madness. But I knew better, because madness doesn't leave claw marks 3 inches deep in concrete. Madness doesn't whisper your name from 50 yards away, and madness doesn't wait. We never found Jonathan's body. His truck, yes. His boot, yes. But not him. Not a scrap of skin. Not a drop of blood. Just 2 sets of prints in the dirt. One barefoot, the other like something walking on hooves too long for any natural animal, like deer prints stretched at the wrong angles. I stayed sheriff another 10 years, never went back to that cabin, never approved any new trails up near the reservation, told the Forestry Commission there were sinkholes and unstable slopes. They believed me. I think maybe they felt it too. One day, years later, Bernard visited me at home. We were sitting on the porch. He was retired by then too. We talked about old times, fished around for stories we hadn't already told each other a dozen times. Then, just before he left, he looked out at the trees behind my property. "You ever think about that thing?" he asked quietly. I didn't respond. "You know the one?" he added. "The one we're not supposed to talk about." Still, I didn't answer, so he just nodded and left. That night, the owl came back. Same white feathers, same cold stare. It landed on the fence post behind my house and didn't move for hours. I sat at the kitchen table, lights off, shotgun across my knees, just watching, waiting. In the years since, I've had dozens of people ask me, "What's the scariest thing you ever saw out there?" They expect a story about a shootout, a drunk with a hunting rifle, a meth head with nothing to lose. I always smile, I always laugh, and I always lie. Because the truth? The scariest thing I ever saw wasn't a man with a weapon. It was a tree that wasn't a tree. It was a voice that had no mouth. It was something ancient, something patient, and I know, deep down, that it's still out there, in that perfect circle of dead soil, in that forest that doesn't rustle, that doesn't breathe. It waits, not for food, not for justice. It waits for the one thing it always gets. The next person who doesn't believe.